Hello and welcome to Rory Sutherland's On Brand, brought to you by Alf Insight. In each episode, we talk to the big names from the world of advertising, marketing and media to dissect and debate success, ingenuity and the future possibilities for our industry. And today, I'm delighted to be joined by Nicola Matthews, also known as the Countess of Cocoa, who is the UK's marketing director for Tony Chocolonely, a chocolate brand that's on a mission to change the cocoa industry. So Nicola, huge welcomes to the podcast. So what I'd love to hear first is it's a brand which, interestingly, in fact, more or less until recently, had a no mass media policy. And it's one of those brands that I discovered by accident, and I can't quite remember how, but I've been a fairly loyal devotee for some time. I've got a vague idea it may have been that you're distributed in Gusto boxes, and I might have bought a bar as an extra in a Gusto box. But I still can't fully remember how it was that I first discovered the brand. So tell me the history of the brand, because although it's Dutch, Tony is actually, I think, Tune, but Tune is the Dutch for Tony. So they decided to call it, and Tune's Chocolonely wouldn't have rhymed, after all. And why, by the way, Chocolonely? I mean, I've got to ask that question. The name is, gloriously counterintuitive. I'd just love to know the first history of the brand and the early beginnings.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, it's important to kind of say that we are not a chocolate company. We are an impact company. So there's quite an important distinction there. An impact company that makes chocolate rather than a chocolate company that makes impact. We only exist to achieve our mission, which is 100% slave-free chocolate. And not just our own chocolate, but all chocolate worldwide. And, most chocolate lovers will have no idea that there is this bitter truth to the chocolate industry. 1.56 million children working illegally and at least 30,000 instances of modern slavery on cocoa farms in West Africa. And that's where 60% of the world's cocoa comes from. So the root cause of that is poverty. Millions of farmers living way below the poverty line because ultimately the biggest chocolate companies don't pay enough for their cocoa. So those farmers are living way below the poverty line and have no choice but to use their children or other people's children to farm their cocoa and make their income. So back in 2001, actually the CEOs and leaders of these biggest chocolate companies did sign something called the Harkin-Engel Protocol and pledge to eradicate the worst forms of illegal child labour from their supply chains. They said they would do that by 2005, but it was a self-binding agreement versus being legislation. And then in 2005, when that first kind of deadline was up, a team of Dutch journalists wanted to investigate whether any change had actually happened. And they did that as part of a documentary that they were making. And of course, they found nothing had changed. The problem was still as bad as ever. But also that the big chocolate companies had no interest in talking about it or working together with them to improve the situation, because they actually called them and tried to speak to them as part of this documentary. So the journalists decided to take matters into their own hands. They wanted to shed light on this issue, and they did that through a series of PR stunts, one of which was making the world's first slave-free chocolate bar, which back then just meant fair trade. And they decided to sell them when Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was released in cinemas. And they called it Tony's Chocolonely. Like you said, Teun is the Dutch name for Tony, and Chocolonely because they really felt like this was their lonely fight against inequality in the chocolate industry, because none of the big chocolate companies wanted to work with them on it. So they launched our milk chocolate red wrapper bar. They sold 5,000 of them in 2 hours in Amsterdam train stations. And Tony's Chocolonely was born, a kind of accidental chocolate brand. And yeah, we're still continuing the fight of those journalists 17 years later.
What sort of market share does it have in the Netherlands, where it first started?
So we have about 20% market share of tablets in the Netherlands, and that tends to be, we switched from number one market share to number two next to Cadbury's. But yeah, they got to number one market share within, I think, 13 or 14 years.
I mean, what's interesting is there's this whole history, funnily enough, of chocolate companies being founded as social enterprises, which is true of Cadbury's. And most of the chocolate brands in the UK, Rowntree's, Terry's and Cadbury's, were all Quaker creations. And they originally started in the hot chocolate, the drinking chocolate business rather than the solids business. And it was very largely driven by having a pleasurable source of enjoyment which was non-alcoholic. Quite a lot of Quakers don't drink. I'm fairly sure that Bourneville, I don't think, had any pubs. If you ever go to a Quaker community, there won't be a pub there. And they were generally highly abstemious. But funnily enough, this is actually, in a sense, a continuation of a kind of early 19th century tradition of chocolate being sold as a sort of pro-social enterprise. But then from the Netherlands, their next country they launched in was fairly bravely the United States. Is that right?
Yes, yeah. 2017, we launched in the US and had a team based in Portland. They're now based in New York, but that was our second market.
So presumably this launching in the US was driven by the need to move into a big market because to fulfill your mission, essentially, you had to reach as many people as possible. And of course, the sales of the chocolate effectively fund the campaign. I mean, what success are you having in the actual campaign itself? In that, presumably all the chocolate is fair trade. It removes the need for child labour by paying adult farmers a fair wage for their cocoa product. Ghana's a particular focus, is that right?
Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire, yeah.
Côte d'Ivoire. And those two countries produce a huge amount of the world's cocoa crop. And as you said, the child labour isn't done for any particular, sometimes child labour is used simply because children are small and there are certain jobs they can do. It simply is an economic problem. Is that right?
Yeah, like I said, the crux of it is poverty. These farmers own, about a hectare of land on average each. That is the amount of land that they have to make the income for their family. And if they are paid the bare minimum, they cannot earn a living income. But it doesn't all just come down to price. We have 5 sourcing principles. We say that you have to have 100% traceability in your supply chain. You have to pay the living income reference price. You have to work with and support to professionalise farmer cooperatives, work with them for the long term, so at least 5 years, and support farmers to improve quality and productivity and optimize their yields. So we have proven that those 5 sourcing principles work. In the cocoa farms or the cooperatives that we have worked with for at least 5 years, the prevalence rate of child labour goes down from almost 1 in 2 children in cocoa growing communities working in child labour to 3.9%. So from 46.5 to 3.9%. So we are proving that these 5 sourcing principles work. And now we just need the rest of the industry to adopt them. And it's such a delicate ecosystem. You can't just pay a higher price. You can't just have traceability. You have to have all of it throughout your entire supply chain. And unfortunately, none of the big chocolate companies are doing all of that throughout their entire supply chain yet. So that's why we haven't seen any improvements in the issue.
So one of the big things is not just the price you pay, it's actually working with the farmers and with the cooperatives to improve agricultural approaches that basically increase yields. Is that right?
Yeah.
It's very interesting because I was talking to one development agency and one of the things they said that worries them about Africa is actually there's this growing trend towards urbanization. And their argument is that to a large extent, the financial salvation of Africa will really come through agri-tech, effectively, massive improvements in innovation in growing techniques that can hugely increase productivity. And what sort of productivity improvements can you actually attain if you actually work closely with these people?
So in part of the living income reference price model that we have, farmers need to grow about 800 tonnes per hectare of cocoa on their farms. We are seeing more and more farmers get towards that level, so moving up from 5 to 6 to 700 tonnes and through agroforestry practices that we support them with on the ground.
Now, interestingly, you've had this no paid media policy from the off. Which there's a slight caveat to that, which is you will use paid media to campaign for your ultimate goal, but you won't use paid media historically, or you didn't until this year, to actually promote the product. How did you manage? I mean, you have got brilliant packaging design. I have to really credit you on that. I don't know who did that, but the packaging design is ingenious in many ways. because it conveys kind of artisan quality, but in a sort of modern, non-stereotypical way. But how did you manage to achieve the levels of distribution you gained so quickly without using any bought media? It must have been a little bit of an uphill challenge. Is that fair? Particularly in the US.
Yeah, so in the Netherlands, the Tony Chocolonely brand grew to be number one market share in 14, 15 years. And that was solely from the PR awareness driven by the documentary and all these original stunts from the journalists. And yes, like you said, the standout visibility, the branding and the whole kind of Tony Chocolonely brand is the genius of Clink, who is our creative director. And he was the first person to draw the red bar. He was a friend of the journalists at the time, and now he's been in-house with us for a number of years. And word of mouth. There's something about this product and this brand that makes people want to tell other people about it and share it. So we followed that same strategy in the UK. We absolutely benefited from the fact that there was already a bit of buzz and hype about this chocolate brand in the Netherlands. We bided our time. A couple of the retailers came to us way before we were ready to launch in the UK. So when we were here and ready, they were, very excited that we were finally launching. So we did have a fast start, but we've made really deliberate distribution choices, working with key independent stores that we call image accounts first. So that was, building really strong displays and giving everyone in the feeling that we were everywhere in London, because you'd see us in a coffee shop and a deli, as well as your local independent store. And then we went to premium grocery, so Waitrose, Sainsbury's, Ocado, and we really stuck with that for the first couple of years and wanted to make that work really, really well for us. And now we launched to Tesco last September, so now we're starting to go to more mass market grocery. But we are trying to educate shoppers that chocolate shouldn't be cheap. So building the distribution in this way has been really key. And I think distribution can actually act as a marketing channel when it's done well.
It's funny you say that, because I agree with you there. And I think the sequencing you chose, which was independent retailers first, then premium retail, then moving to mass retail, there was probably a similar parallel, actually. You're pretty too young to remember this, but San Pellegrino, famously an Italian water brand, also true of Peroni beer, actually. The first place you encountered them in the 1980s was in Pizza Express. There was another beer called Rolling Rock, which would, for its first few years, would only be sold in kind of explicitly American-themed outlets. And that business of using distribution as a form of marketing, I think, is an absolutely ingenious insight, that where you first encounter something, essentially you unconsciously, I think, make inferences about the product and the brand from exactly the places it's sold. Yeah. And so what you're doing by deliberately sequencing that, independent places first, where also you quite often, Gusto is an interesting partnership, where you can, quite often add a bar of Tony's Chocolonely to your Gusto order. Again, those are really, really interesting places, because you encounter it in places where you're not immediately surrounded by other competitors. And so it gains just that extra bit of salience by dint of being unusually distributed. So you went for coffee shops in particular.
Yeah, coffee shops, delis, independents. And like you said, the distribution could be a marketing channel, but our product really is our number one marketing tool. I think a lot of people in FMCG forget that now. We use every inch of it. Like you said, bright, colourful wrapping, the weight of the bars, they're much bigger than most other chocolate bars. The layer of gold foil when you've taken off the paper wrapper, and then the unusual kind of shape of the bar itself. It's
there's a lovely little Easter egg in that, which is that the bar is deliberately unequally divided. In other words, it's not a series of identical squares. It's deliberately unequally divided as a message, which is, if I'm right, exactly, a message about inequality.
So the bar is literally a physical manifestation of the problem in the chocolate industry. The profits aren't shared equally, and therefore our bars can't be shared equally.
Perfect. Very, very nice. It's one of those things, a bit like the little arrow hidden in the FedEx logo, which is, once you've heard that, you can't unsee it. I think that's really rather tremendous.
And people love to know that little fact and then tell somebody else. It's a real aha moment, because it's a point of... So it's our number one complaint that we get on Ocado. So people say they love the chocolate, but they wish, they could share it equally, or they didn't have to fight over the big Tony's piece or something. But once they understand why, they then want to go and tell other people, and that fuels the word of mouth.
Ingenious. Yeah. So in other words, the cake is not evenly divided, and it's therefore completely wrong to pretend that it is. There was a wonderful case also where I think you had an advent calendar in the UK where one of the doors had no chocolate behind it. Again, making a very similar message. And
Exactly.
You did come up against a sort of a fairly large sort of backlash on Mumsnet or something, I think, as a result of that. But again, when you explained the reasoning, did people accept it?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, gosh, I had no idea that English people would get so distressed by there being one chocolate missing in their advent calendar. But there wasn't one missing. They got two the next day. But it was just that kind of breaking the norm of what you expect. But actually, and we got thousands of messages and emails and phone calls kind of that day and that week. But I'd say we went back to every single one of them. We spoke to everybody, and we think kind of 95% of people, once we explained why we'd done it, were even bigger fans than they were before.
And that's, again, actually, I mean, funnily enough, little incidents like that are perfect because your original strategy, and the reason you didn't use mass media, is you wanted to build a personal relationship with customers or a one-to-one relationship with customers rather than just being kind of distant, remote brand. But I mean, so those conversations have a huge, okay, they're costly in terms of eyeballs, but they do have a huge value if you can engineer exactly that kind of thing. Now, interestingly, your recent consumer campaign is fantastically telling people to eat less chocolate. Is that right?
Yeah, I think you're referring to a social media post we did in January. So, yeah, we had a picture of our red bar and a statement that said, "I'm bad for your health," which is quite surprising, I guess, for people to hear from a chocolate company. But that was basically to show our support for sugar tax legislation in the Netherlands. We absolutely don't shy away from the fact that our product is unhealthy. But like anything, it can be enjoyed as part of a balanced diet, and it should be a treat and a luxury. And we want to encourage people to trade up to products that don't exploit cocoa farmers, perhaps enjoy a little less, better quality chocolate that pays people fairly.
This is really interesting. I mean, you came from Diageo, I think, is that right? You were in Diageo before you joined Tony Chocolonely. And I think there's something very interesting, which is what you might call the marketing component of environmentalism, which is there isn't necessarily a conflict between marketing and environmentalism. The assumption is that marketing always wants people to consume more. But I think I was told by the marketing director of Diageo that their strategy, very similar, I suppose, to alcoholic drink and chocolate, is we don't want people to drink more. We want people to drink less of better. Yeah. And I suppose that would be the same approach you're adopting. And if you think about it, one fairly good solution, environmental solution, is if you actually get people to buy fewer but higher quality goods. It would apply with clothing, for example. Fast fashion is an environmental nightmare. You might argue, I think I would argue, in fact, that, premium branded clothing, by the way, for which there is a second-hand market. There are 25-year-old Fendi bags still being traded on eBay. Those things don't end up in landfill. And there's a very, very interesting argument around this, which is a large part, I think, of it would apply also to travel. I don't think I think, to me personally, I think there are huge benefits to the population being reasonably well travelled. But if you can get people to travel less frequently but to stay for longer, for example, you can actually enjoy an improvement in, an ongoing and continuous improvement in people's quality of life without necessarily having a corresponding increase in emissions or carbon emissions or general waste and consumption. So I think that's because I always remember Diageo saying that, and I always remember thinking, it's actually that they would say is their strategy for the whole of Diageo. We wanted, in other words, the world not to become more boozy but more discerning.
Yeah.
Did you enjoy your time at Diageo? I would have said it was a fantastic place to have. It was your first job after Manchester Business School, is that right?
Yeah, I joined their graduate scheme, their sales and marketing kind of commercial scheme, and it was the best possible place to start your career. Their investment into people and training and just the access to the brains behind those incredible brands. You couldn't have asked for a better start.
And actually, the drinks industry, I think, it's a bit like, I spent a lot of my time when I first started working in advertising, working on American Express, which in direct marketing was brilliant because it had everything. It had membership, it had member get member, it had acquisition, it had retention, it had loyalty. There was a little bit of everything there, and you got to understand the whole ecosystem. And I was talking to someone just last night, actually, who was in a specialist drinks company, and the unbelievable kind of ecosystem that lies behind the drinks category is absolutely fascinating, isn't it? It's incredibly complicated. There are utterly bizarre kind of fashions. One of the most fascinating things I discovered is that Fever Tree make a lot of money selling ginger beer in the United States because the Mule is still, I think, the second or third most popular cocktail. Mm-hmm. But interestingly, drinks companies never like promoting the Mule as a drink simply because they think of it as a 1950s old-fashioned drink. And so Fever Tree, by actually going in and promoting the ginger beer, were able to actually almost clean up just because of the reluctance of drinks companies to promote a drink, even though it was popular, which they thought was slightly dated. There was, I don't know if you probably remember this from Diageo, the Mule was typically drunk in a kind of metal container and so forth.
Yeah.
And it always strikes me as just, I always think that the again, there are certain marketing categories where you'll just learn much, much faster because, they're one of those things where every type of problem, every type of complexity is kind of enshrined in the whole business. And chocolate in a way must be another one, because again, I suppose you will always come up against this slight ethical thing, which is that a large part of chocolate is sold as an impulse purchase next to the till. I don't know how you cope with. Do you ever get attacked for using pester power, for example?
No, we absolutely don't market our product to children. It's something very deliberate. We don't think that's the right thing to do. So that you'll never see any of our marketing trying to encourage kids to ask their parents for it, for instance. And even when we do sampling and big campaigns and things, we don't give away big bars of chocolate to children.
And interestingly, you have started launching the smaller bars in the UK. That was probably about a year and a half ago. Was it the... We
actually launched them at the same time.
Oh, same time? Right. Okay.
Yeah, but the big bars are the one that everybody wants to enjoy. So there's the small bars you'll see more in impulse coffee shops and the food to go sections.
And if I'm right, your role encompasses innovation as well as marketing. Is that right?
Yeah, we have a product team based in the Netherlands, what we call our home base. So they're the geniuses coming up with the new product pipelines, but I'm in charge of, similar to my last role at Diageo, kind of commercializing that innovation and making sure that it's fit for purpose for the UK.
And so I suppose, some of the the flavour combinations and the different types of chocolate. Interestingly, I'm not sure you've done a nut-based one yet. Is that right? You haven't done Is there a reason for that? To do with...
we've got loads of nut bars.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Because I know there's sea salt and caramel.
That's the number one.
That's actually your top seller, is it? Interesting.
It is, yeah. That's actually 20% of global Tony's revenue, that one bar.
That's 20%. Interestingly, you sent me very generously a sample, which was the dark chocolate and lemon, which was a very, very interesting combination. I thought that was pretty inventive. In terms of when you innovate, do you suddenly run into new supply chain problems, which is, suddenly you've got to introduce an ingredient and you discover there are other ingredients which are similarly problematic to cocoa, or has that not arisen yet?
We have had that actually with our nut bars. So, for instance, we have a milk hazelnut or a dark almond sea salt. And a good few years ago now, we discovered that there was potentially risks of illegal labour happening where we were getting the hazelnuts from in Turkey. And we exist to change the cocoa industry. So we are really, really detailed in our sourcing of cocoa. All of our sugar is fair trade, and all of the inclusions, which make up a much smaller part of the bar, we do our due diligence and as much as possible try and ensure they come from areas where there's no risk of that. But when we think there might be, yes, we kind of switch production or switch our procurement because we don't have the resources to go and also tackle that problem. So yes, we switched our hazelnut sourcing to Spain.
By the way, where else does cocoa appear? Obviously, it's a fundamental ingredient in chocolate. Is it also? I mean, there is obviously it's a drink, but that's much less common than it used to be. Are there other effectively buyers of cocoa other than the chocolate industry, or is it dominated pretty much by
It's
what that
mostly
one?
food and drink, yeah. Snacks, lots of snack bars would have a small amount of cocoa
Small
in them,
amount. I
or
wondered.
chocolate milk, for instance. And that's actually how we're making more impact. So we bought last year about 8,000 tons of cocoa from Ghana and Ivory Coast, but we are recruiting mission allies. So those who join our what we call Tony's Open Chain and adopt our 5 sourcing principles, and we will facilitate them to adopt that. So Aldi joined last year and have made a Choco Changer bar and Easter egg. The Albert Heijn in the Netherlands, the biggest retailer there, now makes all of their private label cocoa, private label chocolate brands according to our 5 sourcing principles. And there is a chocolate milk brand in Germany as well. And those mission allies added 33% more cocoa on top of the Tony's cocoa being bought from West Africa according to our sourcing principles. So that's how we're growing the impact.
I mean, those 5 principles, all credit to the journalists for really doing their research, because I think one of the things that bedevils purpose-led brands is that sometimes they become fixated on one thing only, which on its own is not sufficient to solve the problem. And so, yeah, I mean, as you've obviously spotted, fair trade is, yes, obviously part of the solution, paying a fair price. But actually, there are 4 other things you need to do in order to ultimately solve the problem in an enduring way.
Yeah.
And I think, did that emerge from their journalistic research? Or?
To be honest, that actually, those 5 principles have really been in place since Henk-Jan Beltman, our current CEO, came in 2012. Yeah. So before that, the journalists were not setting out to create a business. So they were growing it slowly and steadily. But Henk-Jan's really the one who came in and really wanted to scale the impact we make in West Africa. And he's the one that started implementing those 5 sourcing principles. And it's really grown from there. And now we're finally getting the real proof points after a long period of time working with some of our original cocoa cooperative farming partners.
Interestingly, I'm amazed to see how much we consume. So on average, I've just read, we consume 3 bars of chocolate per person per week in the UK.
Yeah.
That strikes me. I'm astonished by how high that is, actually.
Yeah, I think it equates to something like 50 of our big bars a year, which I'm a chocoholic and even I don't eat that much, so there must be some people out there enjoying it even more.
I was going to say that really astonished me. So that partly explains your idea, exactly as you said, that you want people to enjoy responsibly, to use that common phrase. Mm-hmm. You must occasionally get this kind of backlash, which is, yes, you're doing you're in the service of a very good cause, but you are selling an obesogenic product. And you'd respond to that effectively by saying, no, we think this is an acceptable thing to enjoy in moderation as a treat.
Yeah, absolutely. The chocolate industry is $100 billion worldwide. So people are eating a lot of it. And we want to, we don't want people to eat more, but we would love them to trade up from the brands that are not paying farmers a fair price, or even better, campaign with their favorite chocolate brands to ask them to pay a higher price and to adopt our 5 sourcing principles, so that we can really change the broken industry at the start of the supply chain. But we're very honest and transparent and upfront about the fact that, yes, it's not a healthy product.
I mean, you must run foul then of some of the more recent legislation on being able to show in advertising. I mean, some of that legislation strikes me as nonsensical. So you can't show, I've got a vague memory, it might have been Gusto or HelloFresh. You can't show, a pat of butter in the photograph, even though most normal people don't eat butter in isolation. I'm sure there are people who do. Do you think that legislation was fundamentally a bit silly, in the sense that as part of a balanced diet, we will consume some things? I mean, obviously, we'll use cooking oil to some degree. We'll use butter. Cheese, for example, comes into a hugely problematic category. Now, broadly speaking, people don't eat cheese in isolation. Well, actually, that does happen. I have to say I'm probably guilty of that occasionally. But have you ever run head to head against that essentially, I worry a little bit about this, because these things are very complicated. I mean, one of the things that really annoys me is when you go to a party and people are too snobby to serve Coke. Okay, I mean the drink, not the drug, just to be clear. In that, as someone explained to me, two people have explained to me actually, one of whom was a recovering alcoholic, the other one simply doesn't drink. Okay, and they said